Today I'm breaking down all 28 plus final forms in My Hero Academia that truly went beyond Plus Ultra, from the iconic transformations to the underrated ones fans always forget about, starting with Deku's One For All Overdrive. Honestly, the way Deku was moving, not just in this moment, but leading all the way up to it, was truly generational. As the all-for-one side of Shigaraki starts crashing out about ideal endings, our boy Deku first stops the attack, tells him that he's the one who won't get his ideal ending, and then he uses a combination of Black Whip and Fajin to create the Black Chain combo. It wraps around Shigaraki's arm and sends him flying. Shigaraki tries to get the Black Chain off, but just look at the expression on his face when Deku undoes it himself. Right after that, the second user of One For All enters the chat and tells Deku they have to make it quick and finish him off in just 5 minutes. Deku locks in and uses the second user's gear shift quirk to unleash a new ultimate move he calls Transmission. And then, faster than you can blink, he punches Shigaraki with second gear, third gear, and top gear. His speed ramps up with every hit, until he finally brings out his true ultimate move, Gear Shift Overdrive. He uses both Gear Shift and Fajin on himself to bump his speed to the point where the sound of his punches was delayed, meaning he was literally moving faster than the speed of sound. And in terms of power, we're talking the absolute peak of what Deku could output in that moment. Yes, Deku's final form hits its climax when he pushes One For All to 120%. And right as Yoichi says, "We're ending this today," Deku fires off an overdrive-powered Detroit Smash straight into Shigaraki's gut. Now, this was only the first of 3 final forms of Deku we're covering in this video. We'll get to the other 2 as we go on. Next, we have Bakugo's final form. We're talking about his quirk awakening and his ultimate move, Cluster. Bakugo was literally all but killed by the full force of Shigaraki's Rivet Stab quirk while pushing Deku out of the way back in chapter 285. But that near-death experience also caused his quirk to evolve and undergo what's called Quirk Awakening. Awakenings are actually extremely rare. So rare that even All For One himself couldn't wrap his head around Koichi's Slide and Glide Awakening during his fight with Number 6 in Vigilantes chapter 118. He genuinely couldn't believe what he was seeing. Now, bringing it back to Bakugo, his awakening allows him to further condense his explosions, which in turn lets him fire off much stronger blasts. And that leads us to his ultimate move, Cluster. Bakugo's Cluster upgrade got so insane that he was able to keep up with Deku's speed and Fajin, and by the time of the final war, it gets even crazier. I mean, Bakugo became so fast that even Shigaraki couldn't keep up with him for a moment. In chapter 358, he unleashed his ultimate move, Howitzer Impact Cluster, and straight up blasted through Shigaraki's mutated fingers. But hold on, because the real peak is still coming. In chapter 362, Bakugo is once again all but literally killed, this time from Shigaraki punching straight through his chest. His heart literally stops. Conveniently though, Edgeshot uses his Folded Body quirk to repair and revive Bakugo's heart and lungs. And well, after that revival, we get Bakugo in his absolute prime. In the final season, we saw All For One execute Omnifactor Unleash, All For One Goal, which releases every single quirk and quirk factor in his body at once. But joke's on him, because Bakugo has now reached the peak of his understanding of his own quirk. Basically, by realizing how to manage the full body explosions, Bakugo uses the pain from the explosions to back up blasts by relying on when and where the pain occurs. And just like that, he starts producing explosions 3 times larger than before. And then, as All Might yells at Bakugo to dodge All For One, he goes head-on with Howitzer Impact against All For One's Omnifactor. He pummels All For One with a violent torrent of explosions all over, tells him to shut the hell up, and finishes him with a blast so powerful, it literally forces All For One to revert into an infant. Next up, for our third final form, we have Shoto Todoroki's Phosphor. As the man whose entire journey has been about accepting the 2 halves of his power, Phosphor is the ultimate, or better yet, the perfect conclusion to that journey. The first time Shoto brings it up is in chapter 336. He describes it as his body coming together as one, and creating a body even Dabi can't burn. And sure enough, during the final war, he proves that's exactly what he has now. He also uses Phosphor as the foundation for his 2 ultimates. First, there's Cold Flame's Pale Blade. By using the combined powers of Phosphor, Shoto throws a piece of conjoined fire and ice at Dabi and launches him backwards. Dabi recovers and sees that Shoto now has both the fire to withstand his flames and the ice to quench them. It's perfect. But I guess too perfect to maintain for long, because Shoto ends up losing control and has to switch Phosphor back on, while Dabi has yet another crash out. Finally, as Shoto realizes just how he's reclaimed so much of himself, he starts charging up his fire and ice again. He bursts towards Dabi's chest, telling him to please just stop already, and unleashes his second phosphor ultimate move, Great Glacial Aegir, a massive wave of cold fire that shoots directly through Dabi's chest. The flames all over Kamino freeze solid in an instant from the sheer force of Shoto's ice. Seriously, both the scale and climatic impact of this feat is simply impeccable. And you know what? Dabi's, or more like Toyo Todoroki's own final form, is actually very similar to Shoto's phosphor. But before we talk about Dabi, do me a quick favor guys. We're on the road to 100,000 subscribers, and the goal is to hit it before the new year. So hit that subscribe button if you enjoy our content. It would mean the world to me. Number 4 is Dabi finally manifesting his mother's ice quirk. After pushing his blue flame quirk to the point where he was basically blowing it out of proportion, Dabi burns himself to a crisp, and you can feel Endeavor's desperation in that moment. He keeps begging Dabi to extinguish his flames, but Dabi is simply too far gone. At the same time though, Endeavor can't help but notice something strange. Dabi's body is still holding together far longer than it should. This is where he reaches into Dabi's heart while thinking about how near-death experiences can sometimes trigger a quirk awakening. And sure enough, that's exactly what happens. At the very edge of his life in chapter 387, Dabi finally awakens and manifests his mother's ice quirk. Moving on to number 5, we've got Uraraka's Zero Gravity Quirk Awakening. After Himiko Toga brutally injures her during the final war, Uraraka's quirk suddenly awakens, which boosts her power to the point where she can spread her zero gravity from one target to another without actually touching the second target. Basically, her quirk now works like a domino effect. If one object is floating and it makes contact with another, the second one starts floating too. She can generate gravitational bubbles that make anything they touch float without having to touch them all herself. On top of that, her awakening also completely removes her 3-ton weight limit. We saw this entire sequence during her fight with Himiko Toga. And speaking of Toga, she's number 6 on our list. Her quirk awakening is actually the very first one we see in My Hero Academia, and it happened long before her final battle with Uraraka. It happens in chapter 226, during her fight with Curious and her soldiers. And as for what her awakening does, she becomes able to literally copy the quirk of whoever she's transformed into. Now, there's some random reasoning that says she has to be close enough to the person whose quirk she's copying. For example, she could copy twice his double quirk and his signature ultimate moves, Sad Man's Parade and Sad Man's Legion. And that makes sense since she and Twice were close friends. Still, the very first quirk she copies right after her awakening is Uraraka's Zero Gravity. And that tracks too because those two were close enough to be having their little girl talk while literally trying to kill each other in battle. Next, the 7th final form is actually pretty straightforward, but still huge. It's Koji Kota's Voice Quirk Awakening. During the siege on Central Hospital in chapter 371, Kota's quirk awakened, and you could instantly tell because his horns grew in. This expanded his Voice's effective range to the point where he could reach out and control animals across a much larger area. Even better, it enabled telepathic control, so he no longer had to issue verbal commands because his new horns act as a telepathic channel. He can literally just think the command into action. Now, so far we've covered 7 of the 28 My Hero Academia final forms, and I know you're curious about the final forms of some of the biggest characters. So for number 8, we're going to talk about the final form of the 8th user of One For All, the man known as All Might. His final form, his true final performance as the legendary symbol of peace, really begins right after he pulls on his armored All Might suit during the climax of the final war. First, let's talk about that suit. Armored All Might is a mechanical suit specifically designed by Melissa so that he could still fight in the war, even though he's quirkless. And the wholesome thing about it is that every tool, gadget, and weapon is inspired by and named after the students of Class 1A or their abilities. And it's in this suit that All Might makes his last stand. He goes toe-to-toe with Prime All For One and manages to stall him long enough for Peak Awakened Bakugo to swoop in and absolutely demolish All For One. Now, unfortunately, the suit ends up destroyed during that battle. But the important thing is that the data recorded from the suit is what later allows Deku to continue his job as a hero even after the final war. And we'll get to that part later in the video. Moving on, at number 9, we have the awakening of Gaten's Icy Ply meta ability. This is where he became able to control the temperature of ice itself. With that upgrade, he went toe-to-toe with Dabi and completely obliterated an absurd number of Twice's clones, along with plenty of his own Meta Liberation Army allies who just got caught in the crossfire. Not to mention the insane destruction he caused to Daika City. It was such a brazen performance that Mr. Compress casually labeled Gaten as the greatest threat to the League of Villains. Next up, number 10, is Yuga Aoyama's Naval Laser Quirk Awakening. Basically, after being brutally injured during the final war, his quirk awakened and made his laser beams to be faster and much more potent. They got so strong, in fact, that he's the reason we got to see Toru Higakure's invisibility quirk glitch out in the first episode of the 8th season. And since we're already on the subject of Higakure's invisibility glitch, let's put that glitch down as her final form at number 11. Because, come on guys, everyone was curious about seeing more from the best girl. And, well, we definitely ended up seeing more than we probably should have. At number 12, we have Spinner's 3-quirk form. We know Spinner's OG quirk, Gecko, is the one that gives him that classic Ninja Turtles design. It allows him to do things like stick to walls. But honestly, that's pretty much it. Later, All For One gave him another quirk called Body Bulk, which basically buffed him up and increased his stats. The trade-off, though, was that possessing multiple quirks also made him more mentally unstable. Or if you want to look at it another way, Body Bulk just awakened that dog in him. And as you know, All For One also gave him a third quirk called Scale Mail, which allowed him to generate blade-like scales that boost his offense and give him solid defense. When you put those 3 quirks together, you get Spinner's final form. And fun fact, Scale Mail and Body Bulk are actually the last 2 quirks that All For One is seen giving to someone before his death. Moving on, number 13 is twice his final form. And this one, just like the number 13, is a little bit cursed. For the longest time, Twice was limited to only 2 duplications. And even then, he was scared to duplicate himself because of the severe PTSD that naturally comes with such an ability. But during the revival celebration, he finally overcame that fear. And that's when we saw his final form and what he's really capable of. After his quirk awakened, Twice gave an absolutely devastating performance against the Meta Liberation Army. He used his ultimate move, Sad Man's Parade, where he creates clones of himself, those clones create more clones, and those clones create even more clones. This cycle keeps going until the battlefield is flooded with thousands of Twice clones. He later used it again during the Paranormal Liberation War in his fight against Hawks. Number 14 takes us to the dark side, and it's exactly what you think. It's Fumikage's Dark Shadow Total Release, where he charges Dark Shadow with every possible source of darkness, and I mean everything, including random things like cloud cover or even a shadow created by Pixie Bob, just so he can unleash the absolute maximum of Dark Shadow's full potential. In this final form, he uses his new ultimate move, Light of Balder, on none other than All For One. This attack used Total Release as the base, Black Abyss is a powerful punch, and to make it even stronger, Inasa Yawarashi boosted it with his Whirlwind. At number 15, we've got the ultimate combo move from UA's Big 3. We've seen Mirio, Nejire, and Tamaki show off individually, but it's not until this moment in the final war that we finally witness their perfect teamwork. Tamaki pushes his Manifest quirk to its absolute limit, manifesting every single animal, food item, and plant he's ever eaten into one ultimate fusion, plus an added energy boost from Nejire-chan's Wave Motion quirk. This becomes his strongest attack, the Vast Hybrid Plasma Cannon. And we're talking a Kamehameha level beam of pure destruction. And then to take this combo even further, Mirio enters, or more like phases into the chat, by following up the beam with a brutal punch right to Shigaraki's face. Now, sure, it didn't do much to Shigaraki, but against any other villain it would have been absolutely fatal. Number 16 is all about speed. Yes, it's Tenya Iida's maximum speed. Just like the name implies, Iida charges his engines to the absolute limit and unleashes it all in one overwhelming burst. And suddenly, he's moving at speeds that surpass even his Recipro Turbo, which, by the way, was already stated to be much faster than Gran Torino. This final form is so fast that the friction from his movement causes visible damage to the buildings he passes and generates enough force to lift him off the ground. It's just so cool. Seriously, I have no other words for it. The guy's basically powered by the raw aura of his own biological engine. We see this whole sequence in the second half of the final war. And let me add that even the peak of Iida's maximum speed gets a further boost thanks to Todoroki creating a path of ice to reduce drag and using his fire to control the air friction. Honestly, if I had to introduce a normie friend to My Hero Academia, I'd just show him this scene and call it a day. At number 17, we have America's top 1 hero, Star and Stripes' final form, the state-of-the-art hypersonic intercontinental cruise punch. The name sounds like something you'd hear from Bakugo, and no wonder, the power is just as explosive. The scale is just ridiculous. Star and Stripe grabs the Tiamat missiles with a giant air construct of herself, then uses her quirk to redirect them. She swings the missiles around and unleashes a powerful giant air punch that releases a supermassive explosion. I mean, it's basically a nuke. She used this move against Tomura Shigaraki's bad personality in an effort to completely destroy him, and the impact was simply diabolical. And sure, he survived by burying himself underground with decay, but Shigaraki himself stated that if it weren't for all this planning, he would have died from this attack. Number 18 is just pure destruction. It's Gigantomakia's final form with all 7 of his quirks. Let's go through them real quick. Endurance, which is his original quirk, converts morale into raw physical energy. Pain Blocker means he feels literally 0 pain. Gigantification lets him grow to a massive 25 meters tall. His dog quirk gives him heightened senses of smell and hearing, similar to those of a dog. Energy Saver lets him run practically forever with minimal food, water, or sleep. Fierce Gains hardens his muscles to absurd levels. And finally, his Mole quirk lets him sprout massive claws and spines to dig or tear through anything in his path. Put all 7 together, and you basically get the cleanest example of a living biological weapon. No wonder he was All For One's ultimate bodyguard. Moving on, at number 19, we have Muscular's nerf form during his rematch with Deku. You see, by the time he got his rematch, Muscular was already nerfed because Grand had used his Vibrate quirk to destroy several strands of his muscle fibers, meaning he couldn't use his quirk properly when Deku threw hands. And you know what happened next? Deku basically one-shotted him. But hey, nerfed or not, this was Muscular's final form. And honestly, I'm just glad he didn't get to aura farm even a little bit. Number 20 is Endeavor using his final ultimate move. You see, for the longest time, his Plus Ultra Prominence Burn was his most hyped attack. And while he does use it again in the final war, he goes even further beyond with a new ultimate move. It's called Vanishing Jet Burn. Endeavor essentially combines Vanishing Fist and Jet Burn and forms a giant fist of fire in place of his right forearm. With this, we saw him blast All For One straight into the Gunga Mountain. Now, I want to clarify that Prominence Burn still has a high attack potency, but in this particular situation, Vanishing Jet Burn worked better. And since it's his most recent ultimate move, we'll count it as his final form. Alright, after Endeavor at number 21, we have a final form that's been with us since the earliest parts of My Hero Academia. It's Kirishima's Unbreakable, his ultimate defense. For about 30 to 40 seconds, Unbreakable gives Kirishima practical invulnerability to most physical attacks. And guess what? The next final form on our list is actually inspired by Unbreakable. We're talking about Mina Ashido's Acid Man form. Basically, after increasing the viscosity of her quirk, Mina generates a large amount of acid that wraps around her in a humanoid shape. This technique has serious defensive properties, because anything that hits her gets dissolved instantly by the acid barrier protecting her. And at its absolute peak, we get Acid Man Alma. After turning up the acidity of her quirk to its maximum, Mina launches her Acid Man at her opponent. It's so corrosive that it can even burn Mina's own acid-resistant skin, but that's also why it was able to visibly injure Gigantomakia. Next, at number 23, we have Hawks' Soundwave Vibration-Enhanced Flight Feather Blade. The setup here is just genius. After realizing that conventional attacks couldn't break All For One's defenses, Hawks teamed up with Kyokujiro. He used her amplified sound waves to vibrate and supercharge a sword he formed from his own feathers. We're talking about enough power to break even the toughest of materials. In fact, it shattered even the blade itself. The resonance from Jiro's sound waves let the feather blade vibrate at a frequency that cracked open All For One's helmet and defenses. Moving on, at number 24, we have Redestro's final form at 100% stress output. This is the ultimate expression of his stress quirk, where the insane psychological pressure of leadership and conflict is physically converted into raw, monstrous power. We saw him use it against Shigaraki during the final section of the Meta Liberation Army arc. By pushing his stress quirk to its limit, Redestro increases both his mass and physical strength even further beyond his 80% liberation state. On top of that, he can fire large waves of his raw, black energy from both hands at once. Alright gentlemen, at number 25, we've got Gentle Criminal's Gentle Super Lover. Under the effects of Labrava's Lover Mode quirk, Gentle creates an enormous aerial elastic barrier, which is able to hold aloft even the largest of objects. Basically, this ultimate move is a massive large-scale version of his Gently Trampoline. We saw him use it to hold up the falling UA Flying Fortress during the final war, and the scale of this feat is insane. I mean, this elastic barrier was large enough and powerful enough to catch the entire structure and safely bounce it. For number 26, we have All For One's Omnifactor Unleash. This is where All For One summons every single quirk he's ever stolen into one overwhelming form. It's designed to obliterate anything in its path at high speed and reach Shigaraki so he can transfer his consciousness and take over his body. In very simple language, this is All For One at his absolute prime, the strongest he's ever been, especially since he had also taken the rewind drug. He first used Omnifactor Unleash against Bakugo during the final war, and let's just say it didn't exactly go as he planned, but that changed the second time he used it. This time, he was able to battle the entire assembled force of heroes simultaneously to the point where every one of his attacks required dozens of heroes to counter. Though we also got some clutch moments like Best Girl Hagakure redirecting his lasers with her invisibility quirk. Moving on, number 27 is Eri-chan's broken horn form. During Deku's final battle with Shigaraki, Eri cut off her horn and gave it to Aizawa-sensei to use it on Deku to rewind his injuries. The amount of energy she had stored in that horn was enough to rewind Deku by 2 to 3 minutes and regenerate his arms, and that allowed him to land the final punch and finish all for one for good. Number 28 is Shigaraki's final form, and this one is not simple at all. Just like Deku, he's had his own series of power-ups throughout My Hero Academia, and after taking in All for One, he basically becomes the walking embodiment of the quirk singularity concept. But if there's one form I'd call his absolute final, it has to be Shigaraki's One for All form. Yes, One for All, not All for One. It's Shigaraki as the 11th and final holder of One for All. In the finale, Deku forcibly transfers the core of One for All into Shigaraki to overload him with a lethal dose of the quirk. Shigaraki manages to resist at first, but once N, the 6th user, breaks through, Deku and the rest of One for All follows. The quirk tears Shigaraki's body apart from the inside, and allows Deku to reach out to Tenko's spirit. And all of this was only possible because Deku used his overlay form to move. Earlier I mentioned Deku has 2 more final forms besides Overdrive, and this overlay form is his second one. This is a raw and savage form that kinda reminds me of Garo from One Punch Man. It takes his mastery of Black Whip to a whole new level. After getting messed up and basically paralyzed by the gear shift backlash, Deku uses Black Whip to grab and literally pull his own muscles to force movement. When he does this, you see these dark, heavy lines spreading under his skin until they cover his whole body. And I mean, just look at him, and you'll see why I said he's giving full Garo energy. Black Whip wraps around him like a living suit of armor, even forming this big jaw-like shape around his mouth. Deku uses this form to land a disgusting smash on Shigaraki and goes on to transfer One for All into him. So this means Deku becomes quirkless again and stops being a hero. Well, not exactly. Fast forward to 8 years after the war, Melissa, with Hatsume's help and Class 1A's funding, finally completes the hero suit she'd been working on for our boy using the data gathered from All Might's armored suit. And the wholesome part is that it's gifted to him by All Might himself. Thanks to this suit, Deku jumps right back into the hero world and climbs all the way up to number 4 on the Pro Hero rankings. And that's our final form. And that's every Plus Ultra form in My Hero Academia. Let me know in the comments which one was your favorite, and click on this video next, where I explain every One for All user in My Hero Academia.